Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. A peaceful scene shattered by the sudden clatter of boxes being hauled across my hardwood floors. "Just putting these here, Mom," Tasha chirped, not even glancing my way as Ezra's brother lugged a bulky armchair, scraping it against the doorframe. "Careful," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Ezra's mother, bless her heart, bustled in, arms laden with framed family photos. "Oh, these will look lovely here," she declared, already replacing my carefully arranged collection of vintage postcards on the mantelpiece with pictures of grinning strangers. "Quiet now," Ezra's father grumbled, his gaze sweeping over my living room as though assessing its suitability for a livestock auction. I stood there, a silent observer in my own home, a strange, creeping unease settling in my stomach. It had only been a week since Tasha and Ezra had asked, so sweetly, if his family could stay with us for a bit while their house was being fumigated. A bit, I'd thought. A few days, a week at most. Now, judging by the sheer volume of belongings pouring into my house, a bit seemed to have a vastly different definition for them. "Mom, is it all right if we put the inflatable pool in the backyard?" Tasha's voice cut through the chaos. An inflatable pool, my meticulously manicured lawn, the one I'd spent years cultivating, now envisioned as a splash park for Ezra's boisterous nephews. The roses, I began, thinking of my prize-winning blooms, but Tasha was already halfway out the back door, relaying the message to the small army of relatives unloading the moving truck. I watched from the kitchen window as Ezra's nieces and nephews, a pack of energetic youngsters, began tearing across the lawn, their shrieks echoing through the open window. "Such a lovely family you have, Rana," Ezra's mother said, patting my hand. I managed a weak smile. "Yes," I replied, "they certainly are lively." The afternoon unfolded in a blur of unpacking and rearranging. My favorite armchair, the one I'd inherited from my grandmother, was unceremoniously relegated to the basement, replaced by a hulking recliner that Ezra's father immediately claimed as his own. My collection of antique teacups, a cherished inheritance, was packed away in boxes, deemed too fragile for the children. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about these, dear," Ezra's mother chirped, tucking them away in a dusty corner of the attic. "Much safer up here." I felt a pang of anger, but I bit my tongue. This was Tasha's fiancé's family, and I wanted to be welcoming. But as I watched them take over my home room by room, a quiet resolve began to harden within me. That evening, amidst the chaos of a hastily assembled dinner for 12, Ezra cleared his throat and announced, "So, about the sleeping arrangements," my heart sank. I'd assumed, perhaps naively, that I would retain my own bedroom, my sanctuary. "We thought," Tash interjected, her voice bright and cheerful, "that Mom could move into the guest room. It's smaller, of course, but it's cozy, isn't it?" She glanced at me, seeking approval. Cozy. The guest room was barely bigger than a closet, with a lumpy mattress and a view of the overflowing garbage bins. I opened my mouth to protest, but Ezra's mother cut me off. "Oh, that's so thoughtful of you, dear. It's much less work for Rana, isn't it? No need to make up such a big bed every day." A forced smile plastered on my face. I nodded. "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Of course, as I watched them divvy up the remaining rooms, assigning my own bedroom to Ezra's parents. A chilling premonition washed over me. This wasn't a temporary stay. This was a takeover, and in the quiet of my heart, a plan began to form. I remembered a certain document, tucked away safely in my desk drawer, a signed occupancy agreement, a formality we'd all agreed upon before Tasha and Ezra moved in. It was a detail they had conveniently forgotten, but I hadn't. And as I retreated to the cramped guest room, the lumpy mattress digging into my back, a flicker of something cold and hard, something resembling satisfaction, began to bloom in my chest. Tomorrow, I would remind them. Sunlight streamed through the hallway window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, but all I could see was the mountain of boxes stacked against my antique dresser. Ezra, I began, my voice tighter than I intended. We need to talk about your family. He emerged from Tasha's old room, a framed photograph of his parents in his hands. Just putting this up, Rana, he said, beaming. Mom loves having her grandkids' photos on. My grandkids, my house. Ezra, I repeated, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. You can't just move your entire family in. He blinked, looking genuinely surprised. But Tasha said it was okay. Tasha doesn't own this house. I reminded him gently. I do. He chuckled, a nervous little sound. Just until we find a place of our own, he said, setting the photo down on a cluttered surface. It was a beautiful surface, actually, a small inlaid table I'd inherited from my grandmother. Now it was buried under a jumble of their belongings, loose change, a half-eaten bag of chips, a tangle of charging cables. Ezra, how long is until? I pressed, my patience wearing thin. He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. A few weeks, maybe a month. The market's crazy right now. A month. A month of his parents treating my home like a holiday resort. His siblings raiding my pantry. Their children drawing crayon masterpieces on my freshly painted walls. A month of Tasha siding with them. Her own mother a distant second to her in-laws. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. Ezra, this is my roof, my home. You can't just bring your entire family here without even asking me. The smile finally dropped from his face, replaced by a look of mild annoyance. Look, Rana, he said, his voice taking on a sharper edge. We're family. We help each other out. Besides, you've got plenty of space. Plenty of space. The words echoed in my ears, a hollow mockery of the truth. They had taken over the guest room, the spare bedroom, even the den. My things were being boxed up, shifted, discarded. I was a stranger in my own home, tiptoeing around their belongings. Eating my meals on a TV tray in my bedroom because the dining room table was now perpetually occupied by their boisterous gatherings. Family helps each other out, I echoed, my voice flat. Yes, he said quickly, mistaking my repetition for agreement. Exactly. We're all one big happy family. He reached out to pat my shoulder, but I instinctively flinched away. His hand hovered awkwardly in the air before he dropped it to his side. The hallway suddenly felt smaller, the air thick with unspoken tension. I'm going to make some tea, I said, turning away before the tears pricking my eyes could spill over. In the kitchen, I leaned against the counter, the cool granite a comfort against my burning cheeks. My kettle, a cherished wedding gift, sat precariously perched on a stack of their pots and pans. The scent of unfamiliar spices clung to the air, a pungent reminder of my displacement. As the water heated, I opened a drawer, searching for the small, wooden box I kept tucked away at the back. Inside, nestled amongst old photographs and dried flowers, lay a folded document. My fingers traced the embossed lettering on the cover. Occupancy agreement. I unfolded it, the crisp paper crackling softly in the quiet kitchen. A faint smile touched my lips. Ezra thought he knew what family meant. He thought a few weeks, maybe a month, was all he needed. He had no idea. The kettle whistled, a shrill scream that echoed my silent promise of retribution. I would reclaim what was mine. They just didn't know it yet. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across my bedroom floor. I closed the door behind me, the click echoing the hollowness in my chest. Downstairs, the sounds of Ezra's family, his boisterous laughter, the clatter of dishes, the constant chatter drifted up like an unwelcome fog. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the familiar comfort of the mattress doing little to soothe the ache in my heart. Just this morning, Tasha had breezily informed me that her in-laws were extending their stay just a few more weeks. A few more weeks. Those words hung heavy in the air, suffocating me. It had already been 2 months since they'd arrived, their suitcases overflowing, their presents overflowing, filling every corner of my home. "It's just temporary, Mom," Tasha had said, her hand resting briefly on my arm, a gesture that felt less like comfort and more like dismissal. "They need a place to stay while their house gets renovated." I nodded, unable to voice the protest rising in my throat. How had this become my life? I stood up and walked over to the window, gazing out at the garden below. My garden. The roses I'd nurtured, the herbs I'd planted, were now overshadowed by Ezra's family's inflatable pool and a collection of brightly colored plastic toys. The once peaceful sanctuary had been transformed into a chaotic playground. I sighed, a shaky breath escaping my lips. This wasn't how I'd envisioned my life after retirement. I dreamt of quiet mornings spent tending to my flowers, peaceful afternoons reading in the sun-drenched living room, evenings filled with the gentle hum of contentment. Instead, I was a stranger in my own home, relegated to the upstairs bedroom, my space slowly shrinking, my voice fading into the background noise. I opened my jewelry box, my fingers tracing the smooth surface of my grandmother's locket, a small, antique silver piece. It was one of the few possessions I truly cherished. "Mom," Tasha's voice startled me. I quickly closed the box. "Ezra's mom wants to know if you've seen her reading glasses." I shook my head. "I haven't." "Okay, thanks." She disappeared as quickly as she'd appeared, her footsteps fading down the stairs. I opened the jewelry box again, my gaze fixed on the locket. It was a tangible link to my past, to a time when I felt secure, loved, and respected. A wave of sadness washed over me, followed by a surge of something else, something harder, colder, resolve. I picked up the locket, its cool weight grounding me. I wouldn't let them erase me. I wouldn't let them take away everything I'd worked for, everything I held dear. I walked over to the closet, pulling out a small, dusty box from the top shelf. Inside, nestled amongst old photographs and letters, was a folder. I opened it, my eyes scanning the typed words on the crisp white paper. An occupancy agreement, signed by Tasha and Ezra before they moved in, outlining the terms of their stay, the duration, the responsibilities. A formality, I'd thought at the time, a gesture of trust between family. Now it felt like a lifeline. My heart began to beat faster. A plan was forming in my mind, a way to reclaim my home, my peace, my life. I tucked the folder under my arm and walked back to the window, looking out at the chaos below. The laughter, the shouts, the splashes, they grated on my nerves. But now, for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel defeated. I felt a flicker of hope, a spark of anticipation. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn, but in the gathering darkness, I saw a glimmer of light, a light that promised a new dawn, a return to the quiet serenity I craved. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply, letting the weight of the folder against my side anchor me to this newfound sense of purpose. Soon, very soon, things would change. Rain lashed against the window pane, mirroring the storm brewing inside me. I stopped dead in the hallway, staring at the small, handwritten note taped to my guest room door. Please knock. My own door, in my own house. The two words hung there, a flimsy paper shield against the rising tide of my resentment. Please knock, it demanded, as if this were no longer my space, as if I were the intruder. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly as I peeled the note off the door. The cheap paper ripped a little, a tiny, pathetic sound that echoed the fracturing of my family. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, the familiar scent of lavender and old books doing little to soothe the raw ache in my chest. My guest room, the room I'd lovingly decorated, the room where I'd retreated for peace and quiet, now felt alien. Ezra's golf clubs leaned against the antique dresser I'd inherited from my grandmother. A pile of Tasha's clothes lay strewn across the armchair, a vibrant splash of color against the muted floral upholstery. My books, carefully ranged on the shelves, had been pushed aside to make room for a stack of glossy magazines about interior design. "Tasha," I called out, my voice tighter than I intended. "Could you come here for a moment?" Tasha peered in the doorway, a questioning look on her face. "Yes, Mom," she asked, her tone laced with a faint impatience that pricked at me. "This note." I held it up, my hand shaking slightly on my door. Tasha glanced at the note, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. "Oh, that," she said dismissively. "Ezra just put that up. He has some important client calls today and needs a quiet space. But this is my room," I said, the words catching in my throat. "This is my house." Tasha sighed, a sound that grated on my nerves. "I know, Mom, but it's just for a few weeks, until we get settled in our new place. Ezra really needs a dedicated workspace, and the guest room is the only quiet spot right now. A few weeks," I repeated, the phrase tasting like ash in my mouth. It had been 3 months since Tasha and Ezra, along with their rapidly expanding collection of belongings, had moved in. What was supposed to be a temporary arrangement until they closed on their new house had stretched into an indefinite occupation. Their boxes, initially stacked neatly in the garage, had gradually migrated into the living room, the dining room, and now my own bedroom. My life, my space was slowly being erased, replaced by the relentless tide of their possessions. Yes, Tasha said, her voice taking on a slightly sharper edge. And it would be really helpful if you could just knock before coming in, just for today. It's important for Ezra. I stared at her, a wave of cold anger washing over me. Important for Ezra. Everything was important for Ezra. My comfort, my privacy, my own sense of belonging in my home seemed to matter very little. Of course, I said quietly, my voice deceptively calm. I'll be sure to knock. I turned and walked out of the room, the note clutched in my hand, the two words burning into my palm like a brand. The rain outside had intensified, the wind howling like a mournful cry. I wandered into the living room, my gaze sweeping over the scattered toys, the half-unpacked boxes, the unfamiliar furniture that had become a permanent fixture in my once orderly space. I felt like a ghost in my own home, drifting through rooms that no longer felt like mine. I sat down on the edge of the sofa, the worn cushions sagging beneath me, a silent metaphor for my own depleted spirit. I closed my eyes, trying to conjure a sense of peace, a flicker of the warmth and comfort that had once filled this house. But all I felt was a gnawing emptiness, a sense of displacement that settled deep in my bones. Opening my eyes, I noticed a small, wooden box tucked away on the bookshelf, almost hidden behind a stack of Ezra's law books. It was my memory box, filled with photographs and trinkets, small fragments of a life that felt increasingly distant. I reached for it, my fingers tracing the smooth, polished wood. As I pulled the box towards me, something shifted beneath the pile of books, a glimpse of parchment peeking out from the shadows. Curiosity piqued. I reached behind the books and pulled out a folded document. It was the occupancy agreement, the one I'd had Tasha and Ezra sign before they moved in, a formality I'd thought unnecessary at the time. It outlined the terms of their stay, the duration, the responsibilities, the understanding that this was a temporary arrangement. I'd forgotten all about it, tucked away in the safe deposit box, a relic of a time when I still believed in the sanctity of family agreements. I unfolded the document, my heart quickening as I scanned the clauses. 3 months. The agreed-upon duration of their stay had long since passed. A flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks, something akin to hope, began to stir within me. The rain continued to batter against the windows, but the storm inside me began to subside, replaced by a growing sense of resolve. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. Perhaps it wasn't too late to reclaim what was mine. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a way to navigate this storm. The familiar whir of my coffee grinder was absent this morning. In its place sat a sleek, unfamiliar French press. Tasha, perched at the kitchen island, noticed my confusion. "We replaced it," she said, not unkindly. "Yours was too noisy." I stared at the foreign object, a symbol of the slow, creeping change that had overtaken my kitchen, my home. "Oh," was all I could manage. Ezra entered, radiating his usual oblivious cheerfulness. "Morning, Rana. French press coffee is so much smoother. You'll love it." He poured himself a cup, not even offering me one. I retreated to the living room, the scent of unfamiliar coffee beans following me like a phantom. My favorite armchair was occupied by a pile of Ezra's textbooks. I sighed, moving them to the floor, the leather cold and unfamiliar beneath my touch. Everything felt subtly wrong, shifted just enough to make me feel like a guest in my own space. Later that day, I went in search of my sewing kit. It wasn't in its usual spot in the hallway closet. "Tasha, have you seen my sewing kit?" I called. She emerged from the guest room, now repurposed as her office. "Oh, I moved it to the attic," she replied, not looking up from her laptop. "We needed the closet space for linens." Linens. They had brought enough belongings to fill a small apartment, slowly expanding their territory within my house. "The attic," I repeated, feeling a chill despite the summer heat. The attic was damp, dusty, a place for forgotten things. My sewing kit, filled with memories and carefully curated tools, didn't belong there. "I'll get it later," I mumbled, retreating before my voice could betray my growing unease. That evening, I discovered my collection of vintage cookbooks had been moved from the kitchen bookshelf. In their place sat a row of glossy, modern cookbooks, their spines uncreased and pristine. "Ezra loves to cook," Tasha explained brightly. "He thought these would be more useful." Useful. The word stung. Were my cherished cookbooks, passed down from my mother and grandmother, suddenly deemed useless? I ran my fingers over the unfamiliar titles, a wave of dispossession washing over me. The kitchen, once my domain, was now Ezra's playground. He was humming a cheerful tune as he chopped vegetables, oblivious to the silent battle raging within me. "Dinner will be ready soon," he announced, his voice echoing the same oblivious cheer he'd displayed that morning. I excused myself, claiming a headache, and retreated to my bedroom, the only space that still felt vaguely like my own. But even here, the changes were creeping in. A framed photograph of me and my late husband had been moved from the bedside table to a less prominent spot on the dresser. In its place sat a framed picture of Tasha and Ezra, beaming at the camera. I sank onto the bed, the springs groaning beneath me. It wasn't just the physical objects being moved, rearranged, replaced. It was the very essence of my home, my life, being slowly erased. I closed my eyes, fighting back the tears. Something had to change. This couldn't continue. I needed to find a way to reclaim my space, my life, before it was all gone. I opened the bottom drawer of my bedside table, my hand reaching for a small locked box. Inside lay a document, a faint hope flickering in the gathering darkness. A signed agreement, tucked away and almost forgotten, but now holding the key to my future. I had to be careful. I had to be smart. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The faintest hint of a smile touched my lips. They had underestimated me. They had no idea what was coming. Rain lashed against the windows, mirroring the storm brewing inside me. I walked past the garage, intending to retrieve some gardening tools, but stopped short. My neatly organized shelves, once filled with my labeled containers of seeds and fertilizers, were now crammed with Ezra's fishing gear and bulky camping equipment. My potting bench, a gift from my late husband, was buried under a pile of dusty canvas tarps. "Ezra," I called out, my voice tight, "could you please come here for a moment?" He emerged, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "Yes, Rana?" he asked, a slight frown creasing his forehead. "These are my gardening supplies." I gestured towards the overflowing shelves. "Where am I supposed to put them now?" Ezra shrugged. "We needed the space, Rana. Tasha said you weren't using it much these days." My breath hitched. Tasha hadn't even bothered to consult me. The garage, like the rest of the house, was subtly, yet steadily, becoming theirs. Later that evening, I headed to the laundry room, the one space I thought I could still call my own. The gentle hum of the washing machine had always been a comforting sound, but tonight, a different kind of humming filled the air, the rhythmic whirring of a treadmill. Ezra's treadmill. My laundry baskets were stacked precariously on top of the dryer. My ironing board leaned against the wall. A forgotten soldier in a lost war. Tasha was folding clothes on the small counter I used for sorting laundry. She looked up, a fleeting look of guilt crossing her face. "Oh, hi, Mom," she said, her voice a little too bright. Ezra needed a place for his treadmill. He said it was taking up too much space in the guest room. My heart sank. The guest room. The room where I kept my grandmother's antique sewing machine. The room filled with memories of family gatherings and laughter. It was now Ezra's home gym. "Tasha," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "Did you even consider asking me before you moved all this in?" She sighed. "Mom, it's just stuff. It's not a big deal." "It is a big deal, Tasha," I retorted, my voice rising. "This is my house." The words hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. Tasha's face hardened. "Look, Mom, we're just trying to make ourselves comfortable." "Comfortable," I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. By erasing every trace of me from my own home, I retreated to my bedroom, closing the door behind me, the click of the latch a small, defiant sound in the encroaching silence. I sat on the edge of my bed, the floral comforter a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. The room was still mine, for now. My books lined the shelves, my photographs adorned the walls. My memories clung to the air like a fading perfume. But for how long? I looked around, a cold dread seeping into my bones. They were slowly, methodically pushing me out. My own daughter, the child I had raised, nurtured, and loved, was complicit in this silent eviction. I opened my bedside table drawer, my fingers brushing against a small, velvet-lined box. Inside lay a silver locket, a gift from my husband on our anniversary. I opened it, gazing at the faded photograph inside. Our smiling faces stared back at me, a reminder of a time when this house was filled with love and laughter, a sanctuary built on shared dreams and mutual respect. I closed the locket, the sharp snap echoing the hardening resolve in my heart. I wouldn't let them take this away from me. Not my home, not my memories, not my life. I stood up, a new strength coursing through me. I had to do something. I had to find a way to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The rain continued to beat against the window pane, but the storm inside me had begun to quiet, replaced by a cold, steely determination. I opened my closet, reaching for a small, dusty box tucked away on the top shelf. Inside, beneath layers of tissue paper, lay a document, a forgotten promise, a key to my salvation. The hallway was dim, lit only by the faint glow from the streetlight filtering through the curtains. I paused outside the guest room door, a knot tightening in my stomach. Tasha and Ezra's voices drifted out. hushed but clear enough for me to hear. Once Mom's fully moved out of the main bedroom, Ezra murmured, a note of uncertainty in his tone. It will feel more like ours, right, Ezra? Tasha's voice was sharper, more assertive. We talked about this. Give it a few months. By then, we'll have established occupancy. Mom's always been flexible. My breath hitched. Flexible? Was that how she saw my lifetime of careful planning, of saving and scrimping to create this home, this sanctuary? Flexible enough to be molded and reshaped to fit her desires, her husband's ambitions. I leaned closer to the door, my hand trembling slightly. Ezra's voice was low. I just don't want her to feel pushed out, you know. Tasha scoffed. She'll be fine. She's got that tiny room, and she's always out visiting those friends. My friends were the support system I'd nurtured for decades, the community that sustained me. Were they now being reduced to some vague, dismissive category in my own daughter's eyes? Besides, Tasha continued, her voice gaining a hard edge, she'll probably end up moving in with Aunt Clara anyway. That's what she's always wanted, right? To be closer to her sister. This was a lie, a blatant fabrication. My relationship with Clara had always been strained, cordial but distant. The idea of living with her filled me with a cold dread. But the agreement, Ezra's voice trailed off. What agreement? Tasha snapped. The one Mom had us sign, the occupancy thing. He sounded genuinely confused. Tasha sighed, a sound heavy with impatience. Ezra, honey, that was just a formality. Mom's always been a bit overly cautious with paperwork. My fingers curled into a fist. Overly cautious. A small, bitter smile touched my lips. They had no idea. They had so confidently, so carelessly, signed away their assumed future in this house. Look, Tasha was saying, her voice softer now, coaxing. Don't worry about it. It's just a piece of paper. It doesn't mean anything. My heart pounded against my ribs. Oh, but it did. It meant everything. I silently retreated from the door, my mind racing. They thought they had me cornered, relegated to a tiny room, dismissed and forgotten. They thought they were inheriting my life, my home, my future. They had so readily dismissed the formality of a legally binding document, blinded by their own ambition. I walked down the hall, the floorboards creaking softly beneath my feet. I reached my small, temporary room, the one they had so graciously allowed me to occupy. I closed the door behind me, the click of the latch echoing the quiet click of the pieces falling into place in my mind. I opened my bedside drawer and pulled out a small, unassuming file folder. Inside, nestled amongst other papers, was the original signed and notarized occupancy agreement. Their signatures, bold and confident, mocked me from the page. They had signed it so readily, so dismissively, they hadn't even bothered to read the fine print. The agreement clearly stated the duration of their stay, the limitations on their use of the property, and the conditions under which they could be removed. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal of the notary public, a small, hard smile playing on my lips. They thought they were clever. They thought they had outsmarted me. They had underestimated me. They had no idea what I was capable of. The street light outside cast long, dancing shadows on the wall. I sat on the edge of the bed, the agreement clutched in my hand. The house was quiet now, The only sound the gentle hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. A sense of calm settled over me, a quiet anticipation of what was to come. They were so focused on their future in this house. They had forgotten one crucial thing. It was still my house, and I had a plan. A plan they wouldn't see coming until it was far too late. The faintest hint of a smile played on my lips as I carefully placed the agreement back in the folder. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. Sunlight streamed through the gap in my curtains, a cruel mockery of the darkness I felt inside. I sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed Tasha had tried to convince me was too big for just one person, suggesting I move into the smaller guest room. It makes more sense. Mom, she'd said, her voice dripping with false concern. Ezra's parents need a proper room, and the guest room is perfectly adequate for you. Adequate. The word echoed in my mind, a sharp reminder of how little they valued me in my own home. I opened the dusty cedar chest at the foot of my bed, the one filled with old photographs and forgotten keepsakes. My hand grazed the smooth surface of a wooden box, tucked away beneath layers of yellowed lace. I lifted the box, my heart quickening. Inside, nestled amongst dried flowers and faded ribbons, was a folded document. The occupancy agreement. I hadn't looked at it since the day Tasha, fresh out of college and brimming with promises of responsibility, had signed it. It was a simple agreement, drafted by a friend who was a paralegal, outlining the terms of her stay. A temporary arrangement until she found her own place. A formality. I had thought then. A safeguard. I realized now. My fingers traced the lines of her signature, a stark contrast to the carefree girl she had been. Back then, she had been so eager to please, so full of gratitude for the roof over her head. Now, she barely acknowledged my presence, her eyes sliding past me as if I were a piece of unwanted furniture. The agreement stipulated a maximum stay of 6 months, renewable with mutual consent. It also clearly stated that the house remained solely mine, and that I retained all rights and control over the property. A faint smile touched my lips. This changed everything. It was a small piece of paper, but it held the weight of my salvation. It was a lifeline, a whisper of hope in the suffocating silence I had been enduring. The agreement hadn't been renewed. The 6 months had long passed. They were here legally. I unfolded the document, the crisp paper crackling in the stillness of the room. Every clause, every line, was a testament to my foresight, a silent weapon against the slow, insidious takeover of my life. I reread it carefully, savoring each word like a precious jewel. It was more than just a legal document. It was a symbol of my reclaiming my power, my voice, my home. I tucked the agreement into the pocket of my robe, the weight of it a comforting presence against my chest. I walked over to the window, pushing the curtains aside to let the sunlight flood the room. The world outside seemed brighter, sharper, full of possibilities. I looked out at the garden, the one I had lovingly tended for years, the one Ezra's father now treated as his own personal putting green. I saw Tasha's mother rearranging the furniture on the patio, dictating where the new outdoor lounge set should go. The anger that had been simmering within me for months began to boil, but it was a different kind of anger now. It wasn't the helpless, frustrated anger of a victim. It was the righteous anger of someone about to take back what was rightfully theirs. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. This was just the beginning. They had no idea what was coming. They thought they had won. They thought they had pushed me into the shadows, rendered me invisible. They were wrong. I was still here, and I was about to remind them. The agreement felt warm against my skin, a promise of the reckoning to come. I had been silent for too long. It was time for my voice to be heard. It was time for them to leave. A small, almost imperceptible smile played on my lips. The game had changed. The crisp, sterile scent of Evelyn's office, a blend of paper and antiseptic cleaner, did little to calm the tremor in my hands. I smoothed the folded document on my lap again, the thin paper whispering against my fingertips. "Thanks for seeing me on such short notice, Evelyn," I said, my voice tighter than I'd intended. Evelyn smiled warmly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Of course, Rana. Family matters are always delicate." She gestured towards the document. "So, what have we got here?" I hesitated, a strange mix of vulnerability and steely resolve churning within me. This piece of paper, it felt like my last hope. "It's an occupancy agreement," I explained, unfolding it carefully on her pristine desk. "Between myself and Tasha, my daughter, and her fiancé, Ezra." Evelyn leaned forward, her gaze sharp as she scanned the contents. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the quiet hum of the air conditioning. It felt like an eternity before she finally looked up. "And," she prompted gently, her brow furrowed slightly, "and," I began, my voice gaining strength, "it states very clearly the terms under which they were allowed to stay in my house." Evelyn's eyes flicked back to the document, her finger tracing a particular clause. "This section regarding the duration of their stay," she murmured. "It's quite specific." "Yes," I affirmed, a flicker of something close to satisfaction igniting within me. 6 months. That was the agreement. 6 months. Then they find their own place. They've been there for almost a year now. I could feel the anger, banked for so long, beginning to simmer. All those subtle dismissals, the casual disregard for my belongings, the constant stream of Ezra's family, it all boiled down to this piece of paper. "Did they sign this?" Evelyn asked, her voice matter of fact, a lawyer through and through. I nodded, pushing the document closer to her. "Both of them, witnessed and dated." Evelyn leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. "And you say they've overstayed the agreed-upon time frame?" I nodded again, a hard knot forming in my stomach. "Considerably." A small smile played at the corners of Evelyn's lips. "Well, Rana," she said, her voice taking on a new, almost predatory edge. "This," she tapped the agreement with a manicured nail. "This is gold. Their signatures, the witness, the specific time frame, it all makes it enforceable." My heart skipped a beat. Enforceable. The word resonated within me, a beacon of hope in the fog of frustration that had enveloped me for months. "What are my options?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Evelyn laid out the possibilities, each one a potential avenue of reclaiming my home, my life, from a formal notice to vacate, to mediation, to, well, let's just say I had options. Hearing her outline the legal steps, the weight on my chest began to lift. The knot in my stomach loosened. It was a slow, gradual release, like the thawing of ice. For so long, I'd felt powerless, adrift in my own home. Now, The tide was turning. "I want them out, Evelyn," I said, my voice steady, resolute. "I want my house back." Evelyn nodded, her expression unwavering. "We can make that happen, Rona." She began to explain the process, the legal steps involved, the potential timelines. But I barely heard her. My mind was already racing ahead, envisioning the moment I would finally have my home back, free from the constant undercurrent of tension and resentment. The image of Ezra's extended family crowded around my dining table, laughing boisterously, their voices echoing through my once quiet home, flashed through my mind. Then I pictured the table empty, the house silent, the calm restored. A deep breath escaped my lips. It felt like the first truly free breath I'd taken in months. Evelyn finished outlining the next steps, her voice bringing me back to the present. "I'll draft a formal notice to vacate," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "We'll start there and see how they respond." I nodded, a quiet sense of anticipation building within me. This was just the beginning, the first step in a long journey back to reclaiming what was rightfully mine. I gathered my bag, the folded agreement now a symbol of hope rather than despair. As I left Evelyn's office, stepping back into the bright afternoon sun, I couldn't help but smile. The game, it seemed, was finally about to change, and I, for the first time in a long time, felt like I held all the cards. The afternoon sun slanted through the living room window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, but all I could see was the casual disregard for my space. Ezra's golf clubs, gleaming and expensive, leaned against my antique writing desk, a piece I'd inherited from my grandmother. "Ezra, dear," I said, trying to keep my voice even, "would you mind terribly moving your clubs? They're rather close to that lamp." He glanced up from his phone, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Sure, sure," he mumbled, not even bothering to look at the desk as he scooped up the clubs and deposited them haphazardly by the front door. I sighed inwardly. It was a small thing, but indicative of so much more. Later, as I prepared a simple dinner just for myself, as Tasha and Ezra had announced they were going out with his parents, I found my favorite cutting board missing from its usual spot. A quick search revealed it propped against the back fence, covered in mud and clearly used to clean garden tools. "Tasha, love," I called out, though I knew she probably wouldn't hear me over the clatter of pans coming from Ezra's mother's makeshift kitchen downstairs. "Have you seen my cutting board?" Silence. I retrieved the board, scrubbing it clean with a grim determination. These weren't accidents. They were deliberate acts, chipping away at my sense of belonging in my own home. That evening, after Tasha and Ezra returned, the house settled into an uneasy quiet. I retreated to my bedroom, the only space that still felt vaguely like mine, though even here, their presence was encroaching. Clothes overflowed from the guest room closet and spilled into the hallway. Boxes of Ezra's family's belongings lined the upstairs landing. It was as if they were slowly, methodically erasing me from the picture. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I opened the small locked box I kept tucked away in my nightstand. Inside, nestled among a few precious photographs and letters, was the occupancy agreement. It was a simple document, drafted years ago when Tasha first moved back in after college, outlining the terms of her stay temporary. It had explicitly stated, I ran my fingers over the signatures, mine and Tasha's, a bittersweet pang in my chest. I hadn't wanted to do this, but they had left me no choice. The next morning, I made my decision. While Tasha and Ezra were out at another lunch with his family, no doubt I made copies of the agreement, one for each of them and one for Ezra's parents. My hands trembled slightly as I placed the copies on their respective nightstands, weighted down with a small, antique paperweight shaped like a bird in flight. It had been a gift from my late husband. I then packed a small bag, just the essentials, and quietly left the house. I drove to a nearby hotel, a quaint little place overlooking the ocean, and checked in. The sense of liberation was almost overwhelming. I spent the day walking along the beach, letting the cool sea air wash over me. I didn't check my phone, didn't want to know what was happening back at the house. I knew it would be unpleasant, a storm of accusations and recriminations. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. I had taken back control. That evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, my phone finally buzzed. It was Tasha. "Mom," she said, her voice tight with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" "The meaning, dear," I replied, looking out at the vast expanse of the ocean, "is quite clear. The agreement is quite clear. You have 30 days to vacate the premises." The line went silent for a moment. Then Ezra's voice, laced with disbelief, came on the line. "Vacate? But where are we supposed to go?" "That," I said, a flicker of a smile playing on my lips, "is not my concern. You had your chance to respect my home, my space. You chose not to. Now, you have to face the consequences." I hung up the phone, the silence on the other end a small but satisfying victory. I watched the last sliver of the sun dip below the horizon, feeling the warmth of its final rays on my face. Tomorrow, I would go home, my home. The faint scent of lavender baby wash hung in the air, a stark contrast to the bitter taste in my mouth. I stood in the doorway of what was once my spare bedroom, now transformed into a pastel-colored nursery. Tasha's mother, Miriam, was humming a lullaby as she rearranged tiny clothes in the newly installed dresser. "Miriam," I said quietly, my voice catching in my throat. She turned, a slightly surprised look on her face. "Oh, Rana, didn't hear you come in." The casualness of her tone grated on me. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice firmer this time. She set down a stack of folded onesies. "Of course, dear. What is it?" she asked, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "This," I gestured around the room. "This is my house." Miriam's smile faltered. "Well, yes, of course it is, dear," she stammered. "But we're just trying to make it comfortable for the baby." "And this," I continued, walking towards the crib where my grandson, barely a week old, slept soundly. "This is my grandson." I gently touched his tiny hand. "I understand that, Rana," Miriam said, her voice laced with a newfound caution. "But Tasha and Ezra need our help, and we're so happy to be here for them." "I'm happy you're here to help," I replied, meeting her gaze directly. "But help doesn't mean taking over." I pulled the folded piece of paper from my pocket, the one I'd retrieved from my safety deposit box earlier that day. It was the occupancy agreement, signed by Tasha and Ezra before they moved in, limiting their stay, and that, of their immediate family to 3 months. I hadn't wanted to use it, but they'd left me no choice. They'd slowly push me out, room by room, belonging by belonging. My things had been moved to the basement, my photographs replaced with theirs. This wasn't a family staying with me, it was an occupation. Miriam's eyes widened as she saw the document in my hand. "What is that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "This," I said, unfolding the paper, "is an agreement that Tasha and Ezra signed. It states that you, along with Ezra's parents, are welcome to stay here for a period of 3 months to help with the baby." That 3-month period, I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in, ends tomorrow. The color drained from Miriam's face. But we haven't found a place yet," she sputtered. "We can't just leave. I understand that finding a suitable place can take time," I replied calmly, "which is why I gave you ample notice. 3 months ago, to be precise." "But Rana," Miriam pleaded, her voice cracking, "where are we supposed to go with the baby and all our things?" I looked at her, my heart hardening. "That, Miriam, is not my concern. You had 3 months to make arrangements. This agreement is legally binding, and I expect you, Ezra's parents, and all your belongings to be out of my house by tomorrow evening." Miriam's eyes welled up with tears. "Tasha won't be happy about this," she said, her voice trembling. "Then I suggest you discuss it with her," I replied, my voice unwavering. "This is my house, my rules." I turned to leave the nursery, pausing at the doorway. "One more thing, Miriam," I said, glancing back at her. "The crib and changing table stay. They belong to my grandson. Everything else goes." I left her standing there, speechless, amidst the pastel-colored walls and the scent of baby wash, the silence broken only by the soft breathing of my sleeping grandson. I walked down the hallway, the weight of the past few months lifting with each step. The house felt different already, the air lighter. It was mine again. I stopped at the doorway to my own bedroom, the one they'd relegated me to, the smallest in the house. It was time to reclaim not just my house, but my life. Tomorrow, I'd start moving my things back where they belonged. Tomorrow, I would redecorate. Tomorrow, I would make this house a home again. Sunlight streamed through the gap in my curtains, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I blinked, momentarily disoriented, realizing I'd fallen asleep in the uncomfortable armchair in my study. My back ached, my neck stiff. I stretched, pushing myself out of the chair and heading for the bedroom to change. "I'll just grab a fresh blouse," I muttered to myself, reaching for the doorknob. It was locked. I knocked lightly. "Tasha." Ezra, silence. I knocked again, harder this time. "Tasha." "It's me." Finally, the door swung open, revealing Ezra, looking flustered, his hair disheveled. "Oh, good morning, Rana," he stammered. "We didn't realize you were up." A wave of unease washed over me. "Why is the door locked?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He avoided my gaze. "We just wanted some privacy," he mumbled. "Privacy? In my bedroom?" I pushed past him, the room still heavy with the scent of sleep. My bed, my sanctuary, was rumpled and clearly occupied. My heart hammered against my ribs. Where were my clothes? I opened the closet door. Empty. My dresser drawers empty. Panic clawed at my throat. "Where are my things?" I demanded, my voice trembling slightly. Ezra shifted nervously. "We moved them," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Moved them? Moved them where?" I pressed, my hands clenching into fists. He pointed towards the window, gesturing vaguely. "To the garage. We needed the space." The garage. My carefully curated wardrobe, my personal belongings, relegated to the garage. It felt like a physical blow. I stumbled back, sinking onto the edge of the uncomfortable chair in the corner, the one I'd slept in last night. I felt a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach. "You moved my things to the garage," I repeated, the words catching in my throat. He nodded, looking miserable. "Tasha's parents are coming for an extended visit," he explained, wringing his hands. "They needed a place to stay, and well, the master bedroom is the biggest." My vision blurred with unshed tears. My own daughter, my Tasha, had allowed this to happen, had orchestrated this. My house, my haven, had been systematically invaded, my space usurped, my belongings discarded. They hadn't even bothered to ask, hadn't considered my feelings, my needs. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath to steady myself. The hurt was profound, a gaping wound in my heart. But beneath the pain, a flicker of resolve began to ignite. I would not be erased. I would not be banished to the garage like some unwanted piece of furniture. I would reclaim what was mine. I opened my eyes, meeting Ezra's anxious gaze. "I need to speak with Tasha," I said, my voice quiet but firm. He nodded quickly, relieved to escape the tension in the room. "She's in the kitchen," he said, hurrying out. I stood up, smoothing down my wrinkled clothes, my mind racing. The casual disregard, the blatant disrespect, the assumption that I would simply acquiesce, it fueled a quiet fire within me. As I walked towards the kitchen, I remembered something important, a document tucked away safely in my study, a document that they had clearly overlooked. I found Tasha in the kitchen, sipping coffee, seemingly oblivious to the turmoil she had caused. "Tasha," I began, my voice controlled, "we need to talk." She looked up, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. "Can't it wait, Mom?" she said, her tone dismissive. "Ezra's parents are arriving soon, and I have so much to do. This can't wait." I repeated, holding her gaze. "This concerns your grandparents and their extended visit." She frowned. "What about them?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded document. It was the occupancy agreement I had drafted, and both her grandparents had signed before they moved in, a temporary arrangement, clearly stating the duration of their stay and their responsibilities while living under my roof. An agreement that had apparently been forgotten, or perhaps deliberately ignored. Tasha's eyes widened as she recognized the document. "Where did you get that?" she stammered, her voice losing its composure. "It's been safely stored," I replied calmly, unfolding the paper. "Perhaps you should reread it. It clearly states that your grandparents' stay is limited to 3 months. That 3 months ended yesterday." I paused, letting the words sink in, and I continued, my voice gaining strength. "It also stipulates that they are responsible for any damages to the property during their stay." I glanced at the freshly painted walls. the new furniture, the obvious signs of their extended presence. I believe, I said, my voice now steady and resolute. We need to have a serious discussion about renovations and about who will be occupying which rooms in this house. Starting today, the color drained from Tasha's face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a sense of control returning. The house, my house, would be mine again.